which makes you 2 years older than I am, and I love that.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you. Well, they are finally trying. Here they are trying. Here's the latest attempt at trying. The elements of the news media that have been accused of sane washing Donald Trump know that they are guilty of exactly that. And now some of them, like the New York Times, they really, really are trying to do something about it. But this is their first try. So it's not perfect. The New York Times' first try was published tonight under the headline, "As debate looms, Trump is now the one facing questions about age and capacity," with a sub-headline reading, "His rambling, sometimes incoherent public statements have stirred concern among voters." The Times article does not use the term sane washing, which describes the way some in the news media edit Donald Trump's crazy statements down to a shape that allows them to then try to make sense of them. But the article does offer the New York Times' own confession about doing exactly that. Here is the New York Times confession in writing tonight in this article. Often his mangled statements are summarized in news accounts in ways that do not give the full picture of how baffling they can be. The New York Times has done that every single day. The New York Times has been covering Donald Trump, the politician, including in this article tonight. They couldn't get through the whole article without doing it. In this article, the New York Times is trying to cure itself of its habit of sane washing Donald Trump. And in the very next passage after the one that I just read, the New York Times tries to sane wash what Donald Trump said last week to these stupid rich people at the New York Economic Club who clapped enthusiastically for Donald Trump's incoherent response to a question about child care, a response that was not an answer. It was a widely criticized, incoherent jumble that did not answer the question about child care in any way. And in the article tonight, the New York Times thought they could cure their sane washing habit by quoting a larger portion of what Donald Trump said about child care instead of the short, sane-washed bits that they used in the coverage of that event last week. Here is the New York Times' attempt at a cure for its own habit of sane washing, in which, in the end, it sane washes Donald Trump again. Tonight's article says that because quoting Donald Trump at length, quote, can provide additional context, here is a more extended account of his reply on affordable child care. It's a very important issue, but I think when you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, that because child care is child care, there's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly, and it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country. Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including child care, that it's going to take care. And after running that extended, incoherent response by Donald Trump, the New York Times then, in the very next paragraph, sane washed it with this interpretation. What he seemed to be saying was that he would raise so much money by imposing tariffs on imported goods that the country could use the proceeds to pay for child care. In itself, that would be a disputable policy assumption. A disputable policy assumption? That is the single most disturbing thing I have read in the New York Times about the New York Times. Let me just read the New York Times sane washing once again. What he seemed to be saying was that he would raise so much money by imposing tariffs on imported goods that the country could use the proceeds to pay for child care. In itself, that would be a disputable policy assumption. There was a time not long ago when everyone at the New York Times, and I mean everyone, including the printers and the delivery truck drivers, knew what a tariff is. Now it appears no one at the New York Times knows what a tariff is, including their top reporters covering the presidential campaign. This New York Times article allows Donald Trump to say that his tariffs would be taxing foreign nations. The New York Times allows that to stand as a fact in its campaign reporting. And that means that the New York Times campaign coverage and the New York Times economic coverage is hopelessly lost in this campaign. How slowly do I have to say it for the New York Times campaign reporters to understand it for the very first time? I've said it many times before. I understand the New York Times campaign reporters are too busy to be watching this program. I don't expect them to learn any of this from me. I expected them to learn this by the end of the first year of high school. A tariff is imposed by the United States of America and paid for by the people of the United States of America and no one else ever. The entire point of a tariff is to raise the price of the foreign product to the American consumer so that the American consumer does not want to buy it anymore because it's too expensive. All economists understand that American tariffs function as sales taxes paid by American consumers. Economists consider tariffs sales taxes. Yes, tariffs raise money. Yes, tariffs were the only way the federal government raised money before the imposition of income taxes. And the only way the American government can raise money is from the American people. The American government cannot tax anyone other than the American people. And the night before the debate, the New York Times is telling its readers that Donald Trump's tariffs are taxing foreign nations. Yes, Donald Trump tells a lot of lies. Yes, it's impossible to keep up with every one of those lies. But the tariff lie? The New York Times, in an article designed to take on Donald Trump's lies and incoherent ranting, prints Donald Trump's tariff lie and lets it stand. Its only question about it is whether the tariffs would raise enough money to pay for child care. Sane washing Donald Trump's insane response about child care last week, the New York Times tries to tell you that Donald Trump seems to be saying that his tariffs would raise so much money that that money then could be used to pay for child care, but then maybe Donald Trump wouldn't use it for that. Donald Trump did not say one word about paying for child care or using tariff revenue to pay for child care. There's not a single thing in Donald Trump's response that any sane person can convert to Donald Trump suggesting that the federal government should in any way do anything to pay for anyone's child care. And the New York Times hallucinated that explanation into existence. And after hallucinating that explanation of Donald Trump's madness into print, the New York Times then says it's a disputable policy assumption. No, it's not. It's completely impossible. What this article does do is prove to you how deep the actual intellectual rot is at the New York Times, at the reporting and at the editorial level, going all the way up to the top. This is a big and important article for the New York Times tonight. It had to be examined by multiple editors to make its way into print. And every one of them was completely cool with Donald Trump's insanity about tariffs. The New York Times was perfectly happy to put in print that Donald Trump's tariffs are, quote, taxing foreign nations. That lie, the New York Times lets stand unchallenged. Everyone working in the business section of the New York Times is embarrassed by this. Everyone in the business section, editors and reporters, all know the truth about tariffs. But they are not the reporters and editors who cover the Trump campaign. And so they have no input into an article about tariffs in the campaign coverage. None. The New York Times and the rest of the news media has been enabling Donald Trump's lies about tariffs for 10 full years now. And I used to think that they were doing that because Donald Trump was telling bigger lies than his lies about tariffs, more destructive lies, lies about elections, lies that have gotten people killed. And so for years, I have been occasionally, and only occasionally, but repeatedly pointing out Donald Trump's lies about tariffs multiple times a year. It has been a very lonely pursuit, but now I know it is much, much worse than I thought. Now I know that there are people working at the New York Times who believe Donald Trump when he says tariffs are taxing foreign nations. There are people at the New York Times who will allow that to go into print uncontested. They have forgotten whatever it was they were supposed to learn in high school about tariffs. And they let Donald Trump's tariff lies simply seep into the political system, seep into the very soil of American politics without ever examining or disputing Donald Trump's lies about tariffs, lies that give people false hope about what's possible. And that means that we should be sitting here tonight with absolutely no confidence that there is anyone anywhere working at ABC News who knows what a tariff is. I didn't think that yesterday, but I now think that is possible because of what the New York Times obviously does not know about tariffs. And I thought the New York Times was the best on this stuff. The one person working at ABC News who I know knows what a tariff is George Stephanopoulos, who worked on that issue as a staffer in the House of Representatives and then worked on that issue and many others in the White House with President Clinton. But George Stephanopoulos has no role in tomorrow night's debate hosted by ABC News. So when Donald Trump lies about tariffs, it will be Vice President Harris's job alone, with no help from the moderators, to try to undo 10 years of lying to America about what a tariff is and who pays a tariff. And that is how unbalanced this debate is going to be before it even starts. Kamala Harris won't just have to fend off new Trump lies tomorrow night. She will have to fend off 10 years of the accumulated weight of Trump lying, including on subjects that the news media has never made an attempt of any kind to challenge Donald Trump. What's the toughest question you've ever heard a reporter ask Donald Trump about tariffs? The answer is none. There has never been a tough question put to Donald Trump about tariffs. 24 hours from now, you will be hearing many commentators sane-washing much of what Donald Trump has to say tomorrow night. In that sense, Kamala Harris won't just be debating Donald Trump tomorrow night. She will also be debating the news media reviewers of the debate, many of whom do not comprehend the fundamental facts of government, like a tariff is not taxing foreign nations.
We're going to be a tariff nation. It's not going to be a cost to you. It's going to be a cost to another country. So I'm a tariff president. I'm not a tax increase president because we're going to lower your taxes when I'm back in the White House.
Tariffs are taxes on you. The reason no previous president ever wanted to be called a tariff president is that all of those presidents knew that Americans pay American tariffs.